Okay, so next up on our agenda is that we are going to have ODOT join us to update us on their perspective on some of the things we've already talked about, including the ELD mandate and the drug and alcohol clearinghouse. Specifically, we're going to be having Charles Earlson. He is a senior compliance specialist over the Salem division with ODOT. Used to be up here at Jansen Beach. Now he's down in Salem. So, Charles, please come on up.
Hello. Hi. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Charles Earlson with ODOT Motor Care Transportation Division. I've been in the safety unit there for, let's see here, just over 20 years. And hey, John. Hi, nice to see you. Well, and I am now the senior compliance specialist. I work down in Salem, but I worked out of Portland the majority of those years. And I am familiar, of course, with Dave and Glowstone. I'm happy to be here today. I do have to confess something. I was brought to this event. There was a little snafu on our part, I think, and I was unaware that I was going to be here. So, having said that, I just want to thank Dave for having us here representing ODOT, and maybe I can talk about just a couple things. I know that you had spoken earlier about roadside inspections, and Heather's going to be passing around a little handout chart, and I'm sorry I don't have any displays to put up here on the screen, but it is a chart showing Oregon Highways 2015 truck at fault crashes. And hopefully you're aware of the entire purpose of our safety program, the Department of Transportation, is to help to minimize the occurrence of truck at fault, driver-caused commercial motor vehicle accidents on highway. And you'll notice where these are clustered. As you see this, it's heavily clustered around the Portland metro area. But there are other areas along 84, you'll notice, along stretches of US 97, where there's a significant number of crashes. One thing the department is doing this year is we are partnering with our law enforcement partners and trying to really work at doing enforcement, focusing on those driver behaviors that are most indicative and associated with when you have a truck at fault crash. To simplify it, we always sort of say the statistics sort of bear out about 9 times out of 10. If you have a truck at fault crash, it's going to be related to some sort of driver issue, driver error on some part maybe. And I think our number one reason behind with the driving issues is, what would you think the number one issue is for drivers? Anybody? Fatigue's one, but speed, number one, is the number one condition that causes those accidents. So I know that we have raised speed limits over in eastern Oregon, portions of the state. I'm not sure if they pulled back on that in some areas or not. There was a cluster of crashes around the central Oregon area this year, and I don't know what the outcome of that was. But I think to be mindful, I think that's one advantage with the electronic logging devices. I think motor care is going to have a lot more control for the drivers in terms of speed and those types of issues. I think that's a real plus. And so we are really focusing at the Department of Transportation, working with our law enforcement officials and trying to have a greater presence on highway. DOT ourselves, we are not law enforcement officers. We're civil employees, so we rely on our law enforcement partners to go out there and patrol the highways and, look for drivers who are behaving inappropriately, going too fast, making dangerous turns, etc. So that's one of the things that we're doing now. I know that we were talking also about what happens roadside when you're getting inspected and what to expect. Being that I was kind of unprepared, I want everybody to fully participate by asking any questions at any time. And if I'm rambling, let me know. One of the things that we find on highway in the state of Oregon, and we're fairly good at enforcing it, is drivers from other jurisdictions who don't have an Oregon license and being disqualified in this state. And motor carriers invariably ask, well, they find out that the driver wasn't suspended or disqualified from his home jurisdiction, so where was he disqualified? And these are situations where you have a driver from, let's say the driver has a Florida license, for example. Let's make it an Oregon license, for example. And he's out in Nebraska, and that driver gets a speeding violation for something or has some other infraction. And he's notified, and he doesn't have a Nebraska license, he has an Oregon license. And this driver decides, well, I'm just going to kind of let that go. And so that Nebraska court that is hearing this case tells their DMV when this driver doesn't show, they say, disqualify this driver from operating in our state. The state of Nebraska will then set up a record number for that driver and disqualify him in that state, and that goes into a national driver database. And so in the state of Oregon, when we do an inspection, we actually check that national driver database. We call it a PDPS check. And so what the state of Nebraska has done is they have sent up a flare. And so when we go out and do this search, and I'm inspecting this driver from the state of Oregon, I find that the state of Nebraska has disqualified him. Well, there's a regulation, 391.15 says basically, if a state or jurisdiction suspends or if you're disqualified in any state or jurisdiction, you're suspended and disqualified in all jurisdictions. And that driver finds himself being placed out of service. And this happens to be a driver disqualification on highway is what the feds call a red flag violation. And it affects your safety rating significantly. And so carriers ask, though, what can we do about this? Well, if you're an Oregon-based carrier with an Oregon driver, or you don't have to be an Oregon-based carrier, but if you have an Oregon driver, there is a form through DMV, an individual's request for National Driver Register File Check. And, you know, one thing I've learned over the years in regulatory enforcement is don't try to pretend things that you don't know, because it really works against you. I was unaware. I was completely unaware of this. I mean, I knew about doing these checks on highway. I knew the database was there. I knew that it was available to us. But I didn't know how it would be available to motor carriers until today. Because this is one of the things they said, hey, why don't you share this with everybody? I said, that's great, but teach me a little bit about it first. So what this is, it's a form. It has to be submitted by the driver, and in fact, it has to be notarized. And it has to be mailed into the National Driver Register out of New Jersey. But they'll get back information, and it's free, which is another good thing. Now, this form is available on the DMV website. I'm sorry, I don't have the website address for you, but under the Oregon DMV, there's a listing for forms, and it is called the Individual's Request for National Driver Register File Check. So I just have to let you know, again, I was kind of putting this together at the last moment. That's why I don't have the website address. Yes, sir.
What's the form number?
That's a great question. The form number is, let's see if I can read it, 735-7071. And that looks like it was modified on March 12th. So 735-7071. And had I known about this in those 20 years, of course, I don't know how long this has been available, obviously since 2012, right? I would have always been letting motor carriers know when we were in the course of doing a compliance review that this is an option. It's not a mandatory thing by any stretch. And the notarization is a bit of a problem. I concede that. But this is an excellent thing for you to have reference to. I mean, this keeps those unexpected, inexplicable things from creeping up on you and biting you, right? These are things that, yes, sir.
Well, are you saying we can't do it, the driver has
The
to?
driver, right. It has to be done by the driver.
We don't have a way of doing that ourselves, because here
You
the
do
driver
not. I understand.
finds out, he might not tell us, he might not want to tell us.
He might not
can't
disclose
drive
that. That's correct.
in Arizona.
However, you can ask your driver to do this as a condition of employment. If you know, there's nothing that would be against that. There would be nothing against that, excuse me.
Legally, we can ask him.
Sure, yeah. Ma'am, I'm sorry, I ignored your question.
It was the form.
Okay, right, okay. Great. So I thought, wow, that is a fantastic thing. I want to share that with everybody, that there's a way for you to kind of go above and beyond, you know, in terms of when you're qualifying your drivers. But this is something that really haunts motor carriers. And, you know, I understand, and people ask the question, well, aren't the states supposed to communicate with each other when they perform a sort of action? And the answer is yes, they actually are. But the fact of the matter is, and I'm not from DMV, but they don't in all instances. They do in many instances, so. And so anyhow, I just wanted to share that with you. And other than that, I'm just things that are, I am not a federal investigator. I can't say I keep completely abreast of all the changes in rulemaking, but I am aware that in terms of, you know, I have for nearly over 20 years now actually, been conducting safety compliance reviews. This is the principal means that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration uses of assessing a carrier's basic safety posture. And conducting these reviews, you're issued a safety fitness rating. Now, do I have any people who have been through a safety compliance review? And I'm not talking about a safety audit. I'm talking about a comprehensive review where you're issued a safety fitness rating. Satisfactory, conditional, or unsat. Okay, well, I'm trusting that most of you, the one gentleman who's been through it, have a satisfactory rating. It sounds to me, I mean, I would guess that if you're here today, your intention is to be in full compliance. And one of the things I want to mention about compliance is something I learned long ago is when I originally got into this job is that companies that have a satisfactory safety fitness rating have about half the accident rate of those who are conditional or unsat. Now, I've been spouting that out for a long time. That was taught to me 20 years ago, but I think it actually bears out just anecdotally in my history of seeing motor carriers and seeing, you know, doing the evaluation and being responsible for issuing those safety fitness ratings. What a safety fitness rating entails is it's really a risk assessment summary. It's a summary of your risk that's involved. And we know that, you know, the regulations are there. There are minimum standards that you would want to adhere to. You can go above and beyond, like this would be going above and beyond if you'd like to give yourself a little bit better protection. But think of this as terms of risk management. Having said that, the safety fitness determination is under consideration now for review. I think it is being reviewed. I believe that there's supposed to be a additional notice of proposed rulemaking. It was supposed to come out this month. I believe the new safety fitness determination will not be satisfactory, conditional, and unsat. I believe it is supposed to be more along the lines of a fit or unfit. I do not know the particulars of that, I'm afraid, but I think that is something to anticipate down the line. I think what they're going to try to do is incorporate a little more of the real-time events that are occurring with motor carriers on highway. You know, real-time inspections, accidents, that sort of information, along with the things that a motor carrier has to do in terms of their regular management of their business affairs for purposes of safety. Other than that, you've been talking about electronic logging devices. I can't say as an inspector on highway, I have not actually been through the process of having a driver we've transmitted automated onboard recording device information, of course, electronically. But in terms of the electronic logging devices, I just want to say a couple things that I've seen on highway. I guess one of my biggest fears is for the real outlaw companies, and there are some of those. My one concern is, frankly, about ghost drivers. How do we keep motor carriers from identifying drivers that aren't actually participating in movement of that commercial motor vehicle down highway? I don't believe anybody here is going to be anybody who would attempt to do anything like that. But as an enforcement person, I worry about that because I've seen that in the in the course of doing safety compliance reviews. Of course, the other concern is going to be a driver claiming a duty status that is not appropriate to their off-duty, claimed periods of being off-duty or in the sleeper berth. I think that's going to be one of the biggest problems. You know, as motor carriers, you have the opportunity to contest violations on any inspection that's conducted roadside. It's called a data queue. Is everybody familiar with the data queue process? Now that I'm working in Salem, I kind of times get to hear about these data queues, and I work more with the people who look over those, and I'm actually asked to review some of them. And I had one the other day. And what the driver, can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Is that fine? Okay. What?
5 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes to go?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I've done this before. I know how to fill up a bunch of time pretty well. That's a bureaucrat for you, huh? Just a side note, I want you to know the term bureaucrat, that term was invented, this is my recollection, by a German sociologist named Franz Weber. And the idea of the bureaucrat was that somebody to assist the regular citizen through the labyrinth of the law. And imagine this is 19th century Germany, you know, so, but that's really what I and my coworkers attempt to do, to assist you in understanding the law. We have to apply it, yes, when we're doing the work we do, but that's an aside. Quickly, where was I going? I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought, if anybody can remind me. Data queues. So what had happened here is a driver has himself literally off duty in Happy Valley, Oregon. And the inspector is inspecting them elsewhere. And the driver in his notes had put something to the effect of personal conveyance. He said he was going to be using the vehicle. Well, first of all, this personal conveyance, there's limitations to how a vehicle can be used for personal conveyance, but the driver was empty, traveling from Happy Valley to their destination. And the inspector was in between those two destinations. And they said, well, we were traveling to a friend's house in Woodburn, Oregon, and that's when you caught me here. Well, and where were you dispatched to? You were dispatched to Salem. So that sounds like a very unlikely sort of set of circumstances. And what was that driver? Where was that driver at in his time on that day? Well, that driver was at about hour 15 and a half from when they started. So what do you have there on highway? You have a false log in an apparent attempt to conceal a violation of an hours of service limitation. That driver is put out of service for 10 consecutive hours. So I think with the electronic logs, that for the conscientious motor carrier, ensuring that drivers are familiar with what constitutes an on-duty status, that can be found in the regulations in Part 395 under definitions. And basically, that's all time related to work activities. It can even be doing paperwork activities, you know. But when we look at a receiver and we see the driver unloading and signing for paperwork in the middle of a sleeper berth period, we have a problem from an enforcement perspective. Number one idea for drivers out there on highway, of course, is to obtain proper rest periods, proper rest, so we don't have drivers who are compromised operating the vehicle on highway through fatigue. Any questions I can answer quickly? Yes. Hey, Skip.
About current automatic onboard recording.
Right.
And sometimes drivers fail to log out, log in, whatever.
Sure.
We have to do an edit.
Right.
Now, as a enforcement individual, when you go and do a compliance review, and you're looking at logs, and you come across a driver who has a lot of edits.
Right.
What happens? What's going through your mind, and what happens from there?
I don't know, because I have never done it. I'm not going to joke to you. I have never been in that situation. I've never been with a carry with the electronic logging device automatic with the edits. I've just never seen it. I'm sorry. So
Okay.
I have to say, but what would I do? I would, my antenna would go up. First of all, I do, with regard to electronic logging devices, so I can't really answer your question, Skip. I'm sorry. I appreciate that, though. Appropriately. But because I'm not going to lie to you, when this rule came into effect, I read it, with the exception of the appendix at the end of it. If you're familiar with what I'm talking about, that has to do with the technical issues related to the devices themselves. But I want to bring everybody's attention to this document called Electronic Logging Devices and Hours of Service Supporting Documents. It is a Q&A put out by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to frequently asked questions. It's on the federal website under electronic logging devices. It is a 18-page document. I think it will cover most of the questions you have related to these devices. And again, I'm sorry, I am not an expert on electronic logging devices. I have not, it's kind of one of those things I've learned over the years. I hate to say it in this sense, but it'd be, I understand as a motor carrier you have to prepare, but from an enforcement perspective, it's like I kind of sometimes will believe it when I see it, because certain things have not come to pass sometimes. But I believe this will be fully implemented. This is a great document for reference. It's, again, electronic logging devices and hours of service, supporting documents, frequently asked questions through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They've got a link right there to electronic logging devices. So having said that, any other questions I can? Is there a form number to this document? There is not. I apologize for that. But again, this is as easy as a Google search, I guarantee on this. So anyhow, let's see, sir.
Hey, Jeff.
Oh, Bob, how you doing?
Good.
Sorry.
Congratulations on your recent.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I hope I blustered my way. Bob Martin was actually my senior when I started, and I want to just tell everybody something Bob told me. I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
He says, when you're doing an inspection, remember this acronym: LIPS, location, identify the part, and state the problem. This is exactly the same thing I'd like to convey to any of you when you're talking to your drivers about filling out a driver vehicle inspection report. Location, identify the part, state the issue. When you have a mechanic repairing something, use the same procedure. Location, identify the part, state the repair or maintenance that was conducted. So thank you, Bob. Hey, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
Okay.
From what you learned 20 years ago.
Well, thank you very much.
Is ODOT still a CVSA member?
We're still participating in the CVSA program. Yeah, that's correct. And we still, ODOT still fully follows currently ODOT's not, well, I won't go into there. Some political things I won't even discuss here today. I'll put my foot in my mouth. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
One, just going back to the PDPS form.
Yeah.
For a driver that's maybe suspended in another
Another
state.
jurisdiction,
Has,
right.
Oregon or Washington license.
Right.
So the form that you had, is that specifically just for Oregon?
Oregon, yeah, Oregon-based drivers, or a driver who has an Oregon CDL. Now, here's what I'm going to guess, though. This is a national database. I will guess that every other jurisdiction, Washington included, it's going to be one of the most likely candidates, or Idaho if you're from over in that part of the state, has a similar form or access to a similar form.
Okay, because I think, because I used to use the PDPS system when I was a safety driver a long while back.
Right.
It was hard for me to get much information. Wasn't very much information. I believe I found two forms though, general forms from the NDR.
Mm-hmm.
You could use one for the employer that gives you 3 years of access. The driver has to fill out the information, it has to be notarized, but they'll send that 3-year PDPS report to you. The other one is an employee-based, where the employee fills it out.
Uh-huh.
The respective driver, it's notarized, but it's sent to them, and then the employee.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
It's 10 years of information. I do have the links. If you needed, you could maybe give me your
Right.
afterwards. But so I wasn't sure if the Oregon form that you had was just for Oregon CDL holders.
Or it is, right. That's my understanding, and again, I wasn't going to pretend to you that I was unaware of a motor carrier's ability to utilize this database until today. So anyhow, so yes.
Even the provisionals, let's say that driver from Nebraska moves to Oregon.
Yeah.
Doesn't he have like 30 days to move his license to an Oregon residency?
Yeah, but that's kind of another issue. But you do have a time period in which you and you're required to obtain your Oregon license within that period of time. But here we're talking about, I'm just talking about as a motor carrier, and I'm talking about what this is dealing with is when your driver, neither his Nebraska or Oregon license would reflect this. This is something that would happen from another jurisdiction entirely. And when you're issued these numbers from these different jurisdictions, they'll do it either, they'll like in Oregon, we give them a unique identifier number. It's not their license number. Some states actually use the other jurisdiction's licensing information, when they put up that unique identifier. I know my time is out, but if you have any other questions after this is over, you can certainly ask me. And thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.